I'd like to welcome to the podium now Bill Vaijda. Bill is the city manager for the city of Marquette. Bill has immense experience in the city of cyber industry, which includes working in Washington, D.C. Bill will serve as the moderator for our next panel, Hot Issues in Cyber, What It Means to Business and Education. So let's welcome Bill Vaijda.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out today, particularly all of our guests from out of the area. I know it can be intimidating sometimes to contemplate traveling to Marquette, even though we all love to have you here. The weather doesn't always cooperate, and I'm glad we got a beautiful sunny week. And I'm going to do what I normally do, is encourage you to play hooky. I know Dan might not like that, but when you get a chance, just get out and get some fresh air. It's really great to be here in the spring. I thought maybe to just give everybody fair warning, the goal today is really to get all of you engaged. You're hearing a lot about different sectors of cybersecurity and what that means. But ultimately, what your expectations are and what your role and your participation in this is really critical, because I know a lot of the panels today, and I know Dan is very interested in seeing how the messages you're hearing are going to be interpreted and what steps you're taking or what steps you might need the group to take to try to help your goals move forward. But I thought also, just for fair warning, I know we're the only thing between you and lunch, and that's always a tough spot to be in. And so we're each going to do about 8 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions at the end. I'd like to thank my panelists also, Ryan, Jeff, and Dave, for agreeing to come up here and be part of this today. But I thought maybe the best way to do it, because immense experience really doesn't do it well, but it helps me frame when I've had these conversations with other groups what the real dynamics are of business and education and kind of how we got to where we are. Because the world that you're seeing now, all of this money, all of this resource, everything that you're facing wasn't always the case. And I'm not that old a man. I'm 52 years old. I got my start in the business as kind of a teenage hacker. And I grew up through some hapless set of circumstances having to focus on IT and cybersecurity through a good part of my professional life. And the world has changed 180 degrees since I first got in the business. To give you a sense of that, I fell in with a bunch of defense contractors in the mid-1980s. And at that time, believe it or not, microcomputers were brand new. Prior to that, most of the technology that was in use by government organizations, large business organizations, was highly proprietary. The fact that it was proprietary was critical to their business success, because it was not only the way that they kept full control over how that technology was used, but it was also how they kept full control over their customer base. So if you were a Wang customer and you were using Wang technology and that proprietary set of communication protocols and file formats and connecting technology for how that information was accessed from different places, that almost virtually guaranteed that you would stay with that Wang technology set, because you couldn't just go out and buy DEC technology. You couldn't just go out and buy Zenith or Microsoft or any other kind of technology, because the special expertise it took not just to use it, but to actually engineer it, design it, implement it, keep it maintained and operating the way that you wanted it to operate, was a proprietary, valuable piece of that patented, not copyrighted, but patented technology that you were using. And you could imagine for government, it was very interesting for a young man to jump into this, because acquisition rules would allow organizations to go out and compete for different government business. So although you might have Wang technology, if the procurement officer wasn't particularly careful, you could end up with IBM technology. And then that would create a huge problem, because you had to swap out all of your networking cables, and you had to swap out all of your user terminals. You had to look at that data that was stored on maybe a platter in some kind of obtuse storage capacity that Wang provided, and figure out how to download it into a format that, if not compatible with Wang, could at least be read by what IBM was doing. And at the same time, it was maybe only a year or two prior to that that the entire AT&T communications network was a monopoly. There were no other competing communications networks. If you were overseas like I was, you were dealing with the Deutsche Bundespost, right? Or you were dealing with some other kind of PTT. And everybody controlled their domains. And there was a huge reason for that. And it has to do both with business and education, right? What would happen if you were Wang and your secrets, your engineering secrets, got out? Somebody else knew how to work with your systems. It'd have an impact on your bottom line, right? You'd have other consultants out there who could undercut your maybe inflated rates, and you had other people who potentially could break your systems, right? You lost control, and breaking systems was the goal. Because the only way, if you were somebody who became responsible for running or operating one of these systems, wasn't doing it according to the book, it was testing out kind of the things on the fringes, right? Because you were running constantly into problems at your customer sites that required you to fix them. And so unless you knew how to break things, you didn't really have any insight into how to fix things. And the world changed. And all those people that were dedicated to buying leased line circuits that made sure Fort Meade only talked to Fort Gordon only talked to Fort Belvoir, right? All those different government organizations where the IRS terminals only talked to one computing center or one set of terminals at one known headquarters location, and they were only accessible by one trusted source, one cleared group of people, one set of folks with physical access controls, right? All of that went away. Because at that time, the view of business risk, the decisions that the government was making, favored open systems, right? So instead of having to go out and maintain exclusive technology, education, and training and knowledge, so that from the vendor's perspective, if you were a Wang person, you were a Wang person for life. If you were an IBM person, you were an IBM person for life. And they maintained and controlled that talent pool, and they trusted it, right? When you go to open systems, all that goes away. Now let me give you another example. At that same time, I was responsible for command control intelligence systems. And this is one of my favorite stories because it's true. Nobody believes me, but it is. When I was in Europe, I was working with a company called SRI. And SRI, we had this challenge. We used to bring military forces over to Europe every year to prove that if we had to combat what at the time was still a Cold War confrontation with the Soviet Union, that we could move all of our forces from Europe over into, or from the United States over into Europe and combat this force. And it frequently meant that you didn't always know what locations you'd be operating from because forces move quickly. And so you might have to fall in on communications lines anywhere they exist, right? And so you would have to have technology that was flexible, whether it was flexible on the front end, flexible on the back end, so that as forces were moving, you could maintain situational awareness of where everybody was so you could fight the battle and win the war. And at that time, believe it or not, computers didn't have any communication ability. The networks that were in use at the time were, some of them were step switches, the old mechanical switches that were used in World War II. More frequently, they were made by a company called BBN, packet switches. And some of the older folks in the room, I won't ask you to raise your hand, might recall when modems actually were on the outside of computers, weren't embedded in a chip, right? And you would have to, at a very physical level, establish communication from the computer to the modem, from the modem to some other kind of device. Actually, it's a pad. I know what it is, but a pad to the packet switch, and then the packet switch would connect out back to wherever that other unit was. So instead of being a monopoly communication environment, they created technology that allowed you to plug into this unknown kind of network of communications with some expertise to connect it up to the end, to the point that you wanted to talk to on the other side. And the company that looked at this, we brought them in. We said, you know, this is really kind of a challenge. Teaching everybody how to program modems and X.25 packet switches and, you know, maintain all of that knowledge independently because you'd still have to coordinate how to get the two ends connected. It required a human in the loop. They said, well, we know this company. They're starting up out there called Cisco. And, you know, if you talk to them, if we start up a research project with them, they might be able to help out. And so we started a research project with Cisco which developed the first routers. So I actually bought the first 10 Cisco routers that ever existed in a research project. And we brought them over and put them in lieu of modems and X.25 devices behind the switches. And that's where open systems really started to take off, because what we saw was this very controlled, well understood, risk-based access protocol for managing how we'd connect those devices together to one where it was virtualized. And more importantly, in the old systems, they were typically dumb systems. Where the information actually resided in those systems was on these big hosts, in these data centers and these servers. When you get to a router, all of the transactions for those systems now have an intermediary place where the data in motion sits, which means whoever's responsible for those devices are now people you have to worry about, right? Or the locations where they're at are now people you have to worry about. And there was some discussion in the Merit Network about how the internet was structured. Well, back in those days when DARPA was supporting some of the things we were doing, it was before the internet was considered something that the broad public or business could use. We actually had to, when we were talking to anybody other than our government sponsors on the internet, we had to keep track of every email we sent. So they could determine, based on the costs they were being charged, what portion of that connectivity was being used for government purposes versus what might not be used for government purposes that we would have to reimburse them to. And so imagine at that time, think about that as a business practice, knowing where all of your emails are going and being able to attribute those. So when the world changed, when it went to a router-based network, when they said, all this proprietary technology, now that we've eliminated the monopolies and we've eliminated the incentive for full and utter and complete control, now we're going to go to this web-based paradigm. When I was with NATO, we were the first international organization to join the Worldwide Web Consortium. And in '94, it was my job to actually go to that first meeting and sit down and have a chat with everybody about what this potentially would do. And it shifted again the paradigm from having complete control of your data, of all those things that are critical to your business, your proprietary information, your connections, who you're talking with, right? How all those connections are working. It shifted it from something that was centrally controlled within the organization to something that was now ubiquitous across a wide variety of devices that you no longer had control over. Because fundamentally what it did was it said, instead of developing all those proprietary WANG interfaces and DEC interfaces and IBM interfaces and Microsoft interfaces and everything else that we had then, it said we're going to create one browser platform that can fit on everything, and everybody's data can be accessible to it. And so you never have to write a special custom interface code again, a special application that allows you access to data. All you have to do is load this browser, and your troubles are behind you. And of course, from government perspective, right, that was anything but troubles behind you. Because what had been largely a research project to demonstrate how you could do this hadn't ever been designed with the sense that there was a Soviet threat, right? Or a sense that the technology that you controlled, you knew where in the supply chain it was developed, you knew who was touching it, you knew who was accessing it, you knew who was responsible for watching it, making sure that it worked like it was supposed to, right? All of those things, right, were considered lower risk than the benefit that you could get from creating an open system and that sharing and that accessibility. So switch forward. I finished up all my tours overseas, and I came back, and I'm kind of a contrary thinker, and I married a woman who doesn't like a lot of risk. So instead of being part of that .com bubble, I got kind of connived into a life in government service, continued life. And so at exactly the same point in time that everybody was leaving government to go out and make their fortune on this brand new domain of all this great new open technology, I went in to try to help them deal with something called Y2K. Anybody remember that? Yeah. Well, so let's look at Y2K. There were a couple different ways to do it. You either fixed the systems that were there at the time. So you either made the proprietary systems move forward past Y2K, or you figured out, I'm going to buy a new system instead of wasting all that money. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to transition my technology and go do something else, right? Was security the number one thing that Y2K was worried about? Anybody recall? I can tell you it wasn't. right? Unless it was something that was an incumbent requirement predominantly driven by government, because privacy regimes, data security regimes, cybersecurity regimes, all those things came years later, right, from the standpoint of the consciousness of what the world was looking at. I can tell you, none of that technology was embedded or built in. And very frequently, looking at a lot of those transitions from those proprietary systems, even as late as 2000, into the new technology, very little of that incorporated anything having to do with cybersecurity. And the number one goal is just to keep the systems running, not necessarily just to keep them running securely. So I spent a few years at the IRS. I was in charge of a couple of major projects where we got a chance to really look at this issue in depth. And after about 4 years, I took a job. I was the associate director of IT at the National Security Agency, which meant I was responsible for all of their global technology. And I can't say a whole lot about that. But what I can tell you is that in 2001, the president declared cybersecurity to be a national level priority. And he laid the groundwork for what years later would become the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. And through my career, I stayed affiliated with that initiative. And ultimately, when I went back into government the last time, I took a job as the CIO, Assistant Secretary for Information at Department of Education. And as somebody who had always, I'm not a political person. It wasn't an appointment per se. I was a career bureaucrat. But as somebody who had lived through technology, somebody who had the clearances from the NSA, which is kind of the gold standard for cyber, if you didn't know that already in government, I got asked to stay on board through the last presidential transition because about a year before President Bush left, he started something called the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. Some of you might be familiar with it. I haven't been affiliated with it now for a few years, and I don't know what the classification levels are, the individual components, but I know we have a lot of the work underway here dealing with it. It's eminently Googleable, too. But I got a chance to see that from the perspective of the White House. So as the CIO at the Department of Education, I was on the executive committee of the Federal CIO Council. I worked with the White House, with OMB, with different national programs, with the intelligence community, trying to figure out what cyber response the nation needed. And I had a chance to do that both for Bush and Obama. I carried it through. Ultimately, that was the last job I left before I came back to work for the city of Marquette. So, like I said, hapless career choices. I love Marquette. It was an easy one for me. But what I can tell you is the biggest challenge that the nation felt, and it's something that kind of comes down to those seminal experiences. I tend to shy away from terms like battle, fight, the military terminology. I've seen ultimately the reason why we're here is a consequence of choices we made in managing risk and in managing trust. And those are fundamental elements that every business faces. And it's fundamental elements that the education of our students face. Because there's a tension between, if you imagine for a moment, the knowledge you gain in any educational venue, whether you're doing that as a student at a university, whether you're doing that professionally, that ultimately comes down to a personal choice of, am I going to use that knowledge for good or evil? Do I have a leader who's inspiring me to put that information back into good practice? Or am I going to use it for some other standard intelligence outcome, which is money, ideology, sex, whatever other human foibles are going to be exploited, whether it's for business or for personal gain or whether it's for government gain. But there's a reason why we call this malware, this threat, a virus. It's very much like the viruses that we face organically. There's no defense. None of our systems are designed to be impervious to all the viruses we face every day. And there's no expectation that they are. I mean, it'd be great if it was. We could all live forever and never have to worry about getting sick, but that's just not how we're designed. And the choices we made and how we've built the world as it exists today largely reflect the same kind of evolutionary Darwinism that we ourselves live every day. And the consequences of opening up proprietary technology, adopting these open platforms, creating the opportunity for all of the new functionality that resulted from those choices is a profound value that we highly try to promote and further. It's in a large part the reason why our economy is so much more advanced than other nations that can't organize around those same lines. But those choices also created profound vulnerabilities that we have to remain mindful of. And whether you're doing that at home, whether you're doing it in your choices of technology, I can tell you this wasn't made in Marquette. I have no idea who made it. I therefore have no idea what is inside the components. When I was a kid, you could open up a TV or radio and find the bad tube. I could never do that with this. Well, I mean, I probably could, but you give me 20 or 30 more years, I probably could. But this kind of technology is ubiquitous, and it's only becoming more organic. The price per click for using this is becoming more valuable. The cost of this is going away. I'd like to just close on that note just with one more thought. I used to say this when I was at the Department of Education, and they asked me to get out and try to characterize the threat. And I tell them, the bad guys are one click away. And the thing you need to remember is everybody's a target. If a determined adversary to the United States wanted to test an attack on a system that they had in the United States, they wouldn't test it first on the United States. They would test it on someone who's not looking. So if you're a Baptist church in Tennessee and you're not paying attention to your logs, you're not paying attention to who's got access to your credentials, you're not paying attention to your billing statements, you're not paying attention to your audits, you're not doing audits, right? You're a far more likely candidate for an adversary to want to go after without tripping a system prematurely than taking on the NSA or the FBI directly. And so you're hearing a lot about how we've strengthened our institutions, our government institutions, to make sure that we aren't taking the full cyber threat without preparation. But it's just like the old days. If the castle's defended, what do you attack? You'd attack the villages, you attack the people. And so it was said earlier, those first responders become all of us. And so if you're not paying attention to all this technology that you own and operate, whether you're actively trying to break it yourself or whether you're just trying to see if it's being used the way you intended, you're part of our challenge today. And as a business person, as an educator, those are the fundamental problems that you face. If you're running a business and part of your information that's critical to that business is outside your control, what are you doing about it? If part of the access to that data is outside your control, what are you doing about it? If you're a student and you're doing the things that I used to love doing, which is break stuff, because that's the best way to learn about how something works, what are you going to use that information for? And if you want to serve your community, if you want to help make it better, how are you getting connected and how are you sharing that information with other people who feel the same way you do? And so with that, let me offer first up Ryan to speak to things from his perspective, and then like I said, we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for either early lunch or questions.
Hello, my name is Ryan, and I like to break stuff, according to Bill. So a little bit about myself. I work for a company called LASCO based in Marquette here. We provide support for regional financial institutions, community banks around the Upper Peninsula and Wisconsin. We also work with small businesses and other commercial clients. I am an information security officer. So like Bill said, I like to break stuff. And I also like to just kind of inform everyone, try to help out to get the information out to the people that are actually going to be making those decisions. So at LASCO, we kind of take a two-pronged approach. One is we need to have technology in place to help mitigate these risks. But we also have to let the person that's, the receptionist, whoever, know how they can help defend themselves. And that's what you kind of hear over and over again here, trying to get the information out to the people that are actually, clicking on those links or those attachments in the email. And so trying to look at it from a business perspective, how can we make businesses more secure? There are already frameworks out there. I think we've heard of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. There's something called the Critical Security Controls. There's 20 of them. Things like having a secure standard. So when you roll out a new laptop, a new tablet, a new whatever device, these are going to be the things that you would go through and make sure that those are in place. Things like your phone, locks out after 10 bad attempts, it wipes itself. Stuff like that will help kind of keep the bad guys at bay. And so we have that, as well as just constantly looking for vulnerabilities, doing scans, that sort of thing, making sure that there's no back doors open. Just trying to get everyone involved in that. And the end goal of that pursuit is just visibility into the network. So I think it was David that had mentioned that there's two types of people, those or businesses, those that have been hacked and those that are going to be hacked. And so the mindset over the last couple of years have really transitioned from building those walls up to, okay, how are we going to learn about these things as they happen? And so we help banks and other institutions implement security information events management, just a system that, if someone's trying to log in repetitively on your VPN connection, you're going to get an alert, an email, something to tell you, hey, you probably should look into this. And that type of information is paramount to businesses, so that they know, they can do something about that, instead of just finding out, a couple years down the road, hey, someone's been in your system for, 6 years. And you had mentioned the Mandiant report last year was released. I believe the average advanced persistent threat time was in the year range. It was quite a long time. Sorry, just getting back. Things are getting more accessible. So you have your iPhone, you have all these different things that go on. And so not everyone's going to know, implement these controls or even care. I recently went to just, brought my kids to a bounce house. And so I go to pay for it, and the lady, brings out a little square, device, puts it in her iPhone. Well, the iPhone was dead, so she puts it in an iPad. I'm thinking, okay, do I want to hand her the card? I don't, I'm not sure, that they've looked over this iPad, what's really gone on there. So I think those are some things that businesses need to be aware of, being thoughtful and having strategies in place so that your customers can feel confident that they can give you your personal information, your credit cards, that sort of thing. We also mentioned spear phishing. So this is more of the education, letting people know, the person out the street, what do they need to do? And we see this more and more, spear phishing. So an email that is directed to someone on purpose and has information that they might react to. An example is, had a bank president that was really involved with a personal cause, a cancer society. And so a pen tester would kind of use that information. Our information just isn't our work life and our personal life. It's kind of emerged as being one and the same. And so what an attacker is going to do is take any information they can find out about you. I think we had mentioned big data. If you can just get enough information, you can find out how to get to you. And so, they could take, a cancer society form, a PDF that they might be attracted to open, want to sponsor, and just put a little bit of code in there so that they can, when you open it, it opens the form, but it also launches a process behind the scenes. And so just getting people to realize, I guess, how to look at an email, how to see, that it's not really coming from the address that it says it's coming from. And kind of the technique behind that, and I think this was in that National Security Month, whatever, it talked about stop, looking, and calling. So if they're trying to get you to act on something, get you kind of act emotionally on something, just take a step back. Your IRS, the IRS didn't receive your paper or something like that. They'll try to get you to react out of something, some fear, something to go off of. But just take a step back, look at it in detail, and then just pick up the phone and call the institution or person. We've had banks that received what looks like Wells Fargo, a wire transfer with an attachment .zip. Stuff that just, and fortunately, we've trained them to say, okay, something's up here. We don't normally get this, and so they give me a call and, is this legitimate? Well, looking at it, you can tell that it's not. And then also just getting them to actually pick up the phone and give them a call. Some of the other things that I see out there is a password burden. I don't know if you guys have experienced this yourselves, but you just have so many accounts these days. We're creating a different password for each account. But what we're finding out is that a lot of people reuse passwords. I'm sure. Some of us here do that. And so just trying to encourage people to go towards a password manager, something that can create high quality random passwords that you have to remember just one password to access that, and kind of coupling that with a multi-factor. So another piece of information. So if you want to log in to get that password safe, you have to get a text or a one-time password, something to make sure that it's something that you have as well as something that you know. And just try to ease that burden. I've seen an awful number of Excel spreadsheets and other means that quite frankly scare me. And so I think that the trend is towards that and trying to encourage, this is a real burden. People can't remember 30 unique different passwords that are complex. And just trying to encourage them towards a solution that would fit their needs. And the thing along with that is that it only takes one site getting compromised, and then they'll start trying that same password on other sites. So that's where the real risk comes in there. So we use technology as well as educating people. Those are the two kind of things that I see as being beneficial for business. There's always going to be an exception. I think of the case with Edward Snowden, NSA leaks this last year. Kind of looking at some of the memos from the NSA on what happened there. And in that case, from what I understand, is that they had implemented security. They had what's called a PKI certificate, as well as a password on top of that. But he was able to get another user to let him use that certificate while they typed in the password. And the other user probably thought, okay, I still am in control of my password. He can't, Well, little known, he had a keylogger, right, a keystroke logger on the device. So he was able to get that information and able to access it off-site, where from his desk. So there's just, we can keep building security, and we should. But as long as us people are in the business, there's always going to be that weak link. And so I think just, letting people know where to go, excellent, that the FBI has some resources that, are able to, businesses are able to connect into and let them know, and if need be, they can get involved. Not every bank has, someone that they can turn to. And so those type of relationships are becoming more and more important. And I guess just kind of summarize, if you can, take a proactive stance and see, okay, so we're going to go with this new service, whether it be online storage, some other cloud-based solutions, which are attractive and they make a lot of sense. But what's the vendor going to do? What are they doing for security? Where's their data stored? how are they protecting your information, and just knowing who to call, those types of things. And I think just being aware, education, that's the solution. So with that, I will give it up to our next panelist.
My name's Jeff Nemacheck. I'm from work for Compudyne here in Marquette. We are in the same mainly taking care of infrastructures for businesses and not residential, but businesses, schools, and anything in that realm, I guess. One thing, in case this is quite a diverse group. To add on to what Ryan was saying, in case there's someone out there that hasn't purchased any new hardware lately, you see now a lot of biometrics on the new laptops, so you can log in with your face, fingers, just about anything that's built into a lot of the equipment that we're selling these days. So my background, my experience, and just my part of sharing with the group, make sure we have some time for Dave here, but is on the business side of it, and just to kind of go over what we see, what we're working with these days, kind of what we're expecting in the future. And that is, the big thing is bring your own device. A lot of people working from home, working from plane, working from everywhere on their tablets and phones, and the biggest thing we're using is the virtualization, where you can accessing your company's data, from any device, essentially. And so the question is, any business has, how are you going to keep hackers and everybody out of your network and still let employees access this data from anywhere? And so you look at solutions like mobile device management, where someone has their own phone, their own tablet, and essentially it splits that data up on the device, where the corporation has control of their part of that phone, that part of that data, and the user has their own section, and the two aren't mixed. Of course, any employee is going to wonder, well, can they see my Facebook this and my Twitter that? But they really do work well. So when the company, person loses their phone off the boat or whatever, they can still, I guess you wouldn't have to wipe it at that point, but if they lost it somewhere reasonable, you can, as a company in charge of that data, who knows what kind of data? It could be Joe's Automotive with a tire rotation schedule, or a doctor's office with a bunch of medical information. But, with the click of a button, you can just wipe that information, wipe that device, and it's only wiping the company portion, the business portion of that data. So we certainly see, in my business, and I see a lot of people in the IT field here, my part of my business is in, we can work from anywhere. We're literally working on anything. We've got customers in China, India, that we're working on their machines, and remotely, of course. And but my wife works at the hospital, and she as well. She's on her tablet or on her phone and accessing email and other data. And the hospital has controls over that. So I would imagine anybody here has their email on their phone, and it's important for the employers to have control of that data. You see Target, you see number of places losing control of their data, and it's a big problem. So keeping people out, there's biggest thing right now is encryption, of course. Email encryption, you look at the automation of email encryption, where you've got, an employee sending out information they don't realize is all that important. And, well, if I just put a space between the credit card numbers, it won't look like a credit card number. And so, you automate all those things, automate, like Ryan said, automating passwords, automating the logins, and try to take the user error out of it. We have, the solutions we provide are encryption for email. It's all automated, looking at the numbers and looking at the emails individually. And again, to build on what I'm sure everybody's saying, you know, spending the money on equipment that is, you know, you can go to Walmart and buy a $50 router that says firewall on the box, or you get a, you know, a more expensive something that's going to do packet inspection. It's going to cost you per month, but it's going to also update itself every day, every hour, every whatever, and really do a better job on security, perimeter security. So again, it's keeping people out and also you know, managing the data that is out in the field. So that's about all I've got. Pass it over to Dave.
I am the last guy between lunch. So basically, at a university level, we herd cats. I mean, we're an ISP, plus we're a business. So we do everything on the back end proactively to secure our network that people don't see. I mean, we have every tool in the shed out there we're using. We spread our servers among multiple VLANs, behind multiple adaptive security devices. We use extranets and intranets. I mean, we use a registration system on our campus so that every user that accesses our campus network has to be a registered user. Once they register, we can track it right back to the day and time they do anything, because we know what IP address they're on, what segment they were on, what wireless segment they were on, what building they were in. And, you know, we need all that information to secure this network. Basically, I mean, our goal here is to ensure the privacy of our users. I mean, from the day that they come here, I mean, whether you're a faculty, staff, a supporter, any piece of information that we get from you, you know, we retain, we dispose of in the end. We want to make sure that's done in a way that it's secure and safe and that your privacy is not going to be compromised. Part of the things that we do internally is we scan ourselves constantly. We scan all of our servers. We have outside companies that scan our servers. I mean, we have some of the things we do are mandatory. We have PCI compliance that we have to keep, and there's a company that does that scans those servers. We're actually moving some of the credit card stuff off of the campus into the cloud, and I mean, we did it because that's the way it was done. Now the companies that actually sell the stuff are actually moving that into the cloud, which actually helps us in a way because then it puts it on, you know, it's their security issue. I have a team, it's just probably 2 guys that, you know, do the entire university. And so we automate just about every function. I mean, our log collections are automated to scan for, you know, intrusion and things like this. One of the biggest things that we have a problem, I mean, so if you look at our group, we have our servers, we have our business side, and then we have our user group. And the user groups, all the students, it's mainly phishing attempts through email. And then on the business side, you know, we do see some denial of service attacks. But in general, I mean, like I said, all of our servers are behind firewalls or some kind of security device, so we have them locked down pretty well. As far as data that we collect on disk, we actually have started, you know, we encrypt the data even on our physical disks. So if somebody was to steal a physical disk, anything that, you know, that's really sensitive would be encrypted on that disk. Like I said, it's a multiple step approach to security. I mean, we don't even allow ping on the campus. I mean, you cannot ping on segments on campus. So you can't even go and poke around. Okay, we've even locked that down. On our wired switches, we don't allow more than 2 MAC addresses on a port. So it's like you can't put a switch behind it. Okay? I mean, so if you think about everything that somebody wants to do, you know, we try and get there before they do. One of the things that we did this year, I found a company out of Canada that basically, so if you have somebody that's been taken over, okay, every one of these Trojans or malware has to talk to somebody. So this company, what we do is we let them look, they basically run through their DNS servers, and so they know when a machine is going to command and control sites that are malicious. It's kind of like what we do with our email when we run it through all the spam checkers first to try and stop some of the malware, you know, phishing attempts from coming in the first place. And it's really been a successful, I mean, it's not an expensive service. But we've actually, what it'll do is it'll actually call out the machines that have some type of malware on them. And it costs about $1 a user a year, which I think is a pretty cheap price to pay when you can, take somebody and actually point out that they are infected with some kind of keylogger or malware, So like I said, we try and do everything we can in the back end to protect people from themselves, but yet we don't filter anything. We don't try and lock the network down. We leave it open. Even our wireless on campus, we don't use encryption on our wireless network, but we do have a VPN that you can log into if you have something that's sensitive. And when you do go to any of our services, they're all SSL encrypted. So, there is encryption at that point. Part of the reason we don't just secure the network for login is because people have to, they have so many different devices. If you get into different kinds of login security, you basically block out devices and people have problems. So, in general, that's about all I have. And I think we can have lunch.
Like I said, I thank you all to our illustrious panel, and I also want to be mindful of the fact that we are all, it stands between you and lunch, but if there are questions, we'd like to take them now. We don't want to lose that opportunity. Let me also offer, if we don't get to your questions, please seek us out. Also, be glad to respond to anything via email, and I know we're all eminently findable through the web. So if we can't get to it today, it's not a lost opportunity.
Yes, are you aware of the most recent outbreak called the heart blood bug that exploits the SSL?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Yes, and our version of OpenSSL is not susceptible to it. We already checked.
Any other questions? Yep, it's lunchtime. Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Let's give the panel one more round of applause. They did a great job. It was really fantastic. Bill really is a national expert, and you're really very fortunate to have him in Marquette. We're going to take about a half an hour now. The buffet is right through out the door and to the left. Get your lunch, come back in here, and then we're going to have an interactive session in about a half an hour. We really want to hear from all of you. So it's going to be interactive. It's going to be an opportunity for all of us to interact on this important topic. So enjoy lunch.